Hey everyone, and welcome back to Binge Guide, the podcast that helps you pick your next show. I'm Andrew, and I'm joined today by Victoria, our film expert.
Hey Andrew, it's great to be here. Hi everyone listening.
Today, we're diving deep into a film called An Unfinished Film. This one is a docufiction. It takes us back to the really early days of the pandemic, like right when it was first starting in China, and it throws in this fascinating meta-narrative about filmmaking.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah, have you ever seen a movie about making a movie?
Yeah.
But then a real-life event, like a huge, massive global event, suddenly becomes part of what they're filming.
That's so meta.
That's an unfinished film, in a nutshell.
Yeah, and it really blends these layers of reality in a way that just constantly makes you question what you're seeing. Is this real? Is it staged? What's going on?
Yeah.
The film follows a film crew. They're reuniting in 2020.
Okay.
Near Wuhan, of all places.
Oh.
To finish a project they abandoned 10 years earlier.
So they're already dealing with all the baggage of like an old project.
Exactly. And then their plans get completely derailed when the city goes into lockdown because of the emerging COVID-19 outbreak.
So they're not just dealing with the challenges of finishing a film, they're also grappling with this huge, unprecedented global pandemic unfolding around them.
Yeah, talk about high stakes, right?
Yeah.
And to add like another layer of complexity, the film blends actual footage from those early lockdown days.
Oh, wow.
With stage scenes. And get this, the actors even play versions of themselves.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it's like imagine being stuck in lockdown. You're unsure of the future. You're trying to make sense of everything that's happening. And then you're also trying to make a movie.
Oh, my gosh.
This film gives you like a glimpse into that experience, but through this added lens of filmmaking.
It's a commentary on the filmmaking process itself, set against this backdrop of global uncertainty. I mean, it's no surprise that this film was directed by Liu Ye, a filmmaker known for his kind of bold and often controversial approach.
Yeah, Liu Ye is like the rebel of Chinese cinema. He's known for pushing boundaries, tackling themes that are considered sensitive by the authorities. And yeah, he's had run-ins with censorship before.
I bet.
And An Unfinished Film is no exception.
Wow. So what's his style like?
His films often have this like raw, almost documentary-like feel to them. He's not afraid to use a handheld camera to capture the immediacy of a scene.
Yeah, I noticed that shaky camera work too. It felt very deliberate, almost like it was mimicking the anxiety and disorientation people must have felt during those early days of the pandemic.
Exactly. And he doesn't just use that handheld style, he also incorporates actual social media footage and news snippets from that period.
Oh, wow.
It's like he's weaving together this tapestry of like different realities, showing us how our individual experiences are intertwined with these larger events.
It's very effective. It creates this feeling of being right there in the midst of all the chaos and uncertainty.
Right. And, you know, we've talked about the plot, we've talked about Liu Ye's style, but what makes An Unfinished Film really stand out is how it messes with our sense of reality. It blurs the lines between what's real and what's staged.
Yeah, and it asks us to think about how we construct narratives, not just in filmmaking, but in our understanding of history itself.
Oh, absolutely. It's like he's saying, don't just passively accept the stories you're told, question them, dig deeper, and consider different perspectives.
Right. And speaking of different perspectives, this film offers a glimpse into the Chinese experience of the pandemic, which is something we don't often see in Western media.
Absolutely. And it shows us how the pandemic wasn't just a global health crisis, right? It was also a social and political crisis that played out differently in different parts of the world.
Right.
And An Unfinished Film doesn't shy away from portraying the authoritarian aspects of the Chinese government's response, like the strict controls, the surveillance measures.
It's a reminder that there are always multiple sides to every story, and that understanding a situation fully requires considering those diverse viewpoints.
Exactly. And that's what makes this film so thought-provoking. It's not just a story about a film crew. It's a reflection of our times. It's asking us to question what's real, what's staged, and how we make sense of the world when everything feels uncertain.
Yeah. I think we've given our listeners plenty to chew on for now, but don't worry, we'll be back in just a few minutes to delve even deeper into An Unfinished Film and its themes.
We'll be right back. You know, what I find really fascinating about this film, An Unfinished Film, is how it uses the act of revisiting the past. going back and looking at that old footage to explore the nature of memory. Like, the crew is constantly looking back at what they filmed a decade ago.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if the pandemic, this whole crazy situation, becomes this catalyst for their own introspection,
Yeah.
It's forcing them to confront not just this present crisis, but their own personal histories as well.
It's like they're asking themselves, who were we then? Who are we now? How has this whole thing changed us?
Exactly.
And it's not just the characters in the film, I think. A lot of us can relate to that feeling. The pandemic forced a lot of us to slow down, reevaluate, think about our priorities, what really matters. It was a time of such immense uncertainty, both personally and as a society.
Absolutely. And I think Liu Ye captures that beautifully. There's this sense of melancholy and nostalgia for that time before the pandemic, But there's also this sense of resilience, this determination to keep going, to find meaning, find connection, even in the middle of all this chaos.
Remember that scene where the crew is arguing about whether to keep filming or not during the lockdown? It just perfectly captures that tension between personal ambition and social responsibility that so many people felt at the time. What did you think of their decision?
I thought it was so compelling because it highlighted those ethical dilemmas that arose during the pandemic. Do you put your creative pursuits first? Or do you set them aside for the greater good? There are no easy answers, and the film doesn't try to give you any. It just presents the complexity of the situation and lets the audience wrestle with those questions.
Right. And it does all of that within this very specific cultural context.
Yeah.
The experience of the lockdown in China was so unique, especially how the government handled it. And the film doesn't shy away from showing those authoritarian aspects, like the strict controls and surveillance.
Yeah.
It's a perspective that, honestly, we just don't see a lot in Western media.
Absolutely. And it's a good reminder that this pandemic, it wasn't just a global health crisis, it was also a social and political crisis. It really played out differently depending on where you were in the world. An unfinished film kind of gives us a peek into the reality of what people in China were going through, what their lives were like during those early days of the outbreak.
Yeah. It makes you think about how our own individual freedoms and rights are affected in times like these, times of crisis.
It really does.
And it really raises questions about, how much control government should have during these situations. Is it okay to restrict individual liberties in the name of public health? Are we okay with that?
Yeah.
These are really complicated questions, and the film doesn't offer easy answers. It just shows you the facts, the emotions, all those complexities.
Right. It lets the audience draw their own conclusions.
It lets you decide what you think.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes this film so powerful. It really encourages dialogue. It asks us to think critically about how we respond to crises, both individually and as a society.
And to question the narratives that we're given.
Right.
The official versions of events versus the lived realities of people on the ground.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that while the film's been censored in China, it's really been embraced internationally, both by audiences and critics.
It just goes to show you how universal these themes really are. It's a human experience that transcends culture.
Yeah.
Even though the film takes place in China, it deals with emotions and challenges that resonate with anyone who's lived through this pandemic. The fear, the isolation, that longing for connection.
Yeah, it's universal.
These are things everyone can understand, no matter where you're from.
So bringing it back to the bigger picture, what does an unfinished film tell us about the state of cinema today?
I think it shows how cinema is evolving, filmmakers are finding new ways to tell stories, they're blending genres, they're experimenting with form. An unfinished film, this movie is a great example. It's not just a straight documentary, and it's not just a drama. It's this hybrid form, It uses elements of both to create something really unique.
And thought-provoking.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that great cinema can be both timely and timeless, right?
Yeah.
It can capture a specific moment in history, the early days of the pandemic in China, but also speak to these universal truths about human experience. Things that are relevant no matter when or where you watch it.
Exactly. And for those of you who are looking for something different, something that challenges how you think about documentaries, an unfinished film is definitely worth your time.
Yeah.
It's a film that stays with you. It makes you think about your own experiences, your own viewpoints. It's not just entertainment. It's an invitation to engage with these bigger conversations about who we are, the world, and the power of stories.
And speaking of engaging with bigger conversations, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back to wrap things up with our final thoughts on an unfinished film. Welcome back to Binge Guide. We've been talking about an unfinished film, a film that really mixes documentary and fiction as it shows us what a film crew goes through in Wuhan during those first few weeks of the COVID lockdown.
Yeah, it's one of those films that asks a lot of its audience, Like, it doesn't just want you to sit back and watch. You're constantly trying to figure out, okay, what's real, what's made up, and how are they using those different things to tell the story?
It's almost as if Liu Ye, the director, is like handing you all the pieces of a puzzle and then saying, all right, you put it together.
Exactly. But that's what makes it such a rewarding experience. You're actually engaged. You're not just passively taking it in.
Right.
It's a film that, it sticks with you. Even after it's over, you're still thinking about it. And it's not just about the stuff you saw on screen. It makes you think about your own life, your own experiences, even your own biases.
We've talked a lot about how an unfinished film gives us this really unique perspective on the pandemic, especially from the Chinese point of view.
Yeah.
But there's also something about it that feels, I don't know, timeless.
I know what you mean.
Like those themes of isolation, searching for connection, trying to find meaning in all the chaos. Those are things we can all relate to, no matter what's going on in the world.
Absolutely. And it also makes you think about the role of art during times of crisis,
Yeah.
Can art help us feel better? Can it help us understand the world? Can it challenge, the stories that are being told to us? An unfinished film, it grapples with all of those things.
And it does it in such an interesting way. It's intellectually stimulating, but it's also really emotional. You're not just thinking about the film, you're feeling it too.
Right.
You connect with those characters on a human level, even though their experiences might be so different from our own.
And that's the power of storytelling, right? It allows us to see the world through someone else's eyes.
So to our listeners, if you're looking for a film that's both timely and timeless, something that will make you think, something that will stay with you, an unfinished film is definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, it's not a light watch, but it is rewarding.
Yeah.
And it's one of those films that just gets people talking. We've talked about how it deals with the pandemic, censorship, even the idea of truth. But it also makes you wonder, how much of what we see in documentaries or even just news footage is really objective?
It's true.
And how are our memories shaped by the stories we're told?
Those are the kinds of questions that stick with you long after the movie ends.
Exactly.
And that's what we're all about here at Binge Guide. We want to help you find the films and shows that not only entertain you, but that make you think, make you feel. The kind of stuff that stays with you.
So if you're ready for an experience that will really challenge you, an experience that will leave you thinking about life's big questions, you gotta check out an unfinished film.
You won't be disappointed. And remember, Binge Guide is here to help you find your next great show. What will you watch?